Hi, friends, and welcome to 15241 Today Talk. And Jim Render and I are honored to have with us a great individual. Yes, great because he was a high school star. Great because he was a college star. Great Steeler, Hall of Famer. But also, and maybe to an extent even more important, great because he has continued to be a part of Western Pennsylvania, and he cares about young people, and he's made a commitment to helping young people grow. I'm talking about Hall of Famer Mel Blount. Mel, it is tremendous honor for us to have you with us.
Well,
thanks for finding us. It was a little bit of a trek for you to find our location, but thank you.
Hey, well, let me just say it's an honor to be here, and I'm really, I've never been to the school here, and I'm walking around and saying, man, this is like a college campus. It's awesome. It's a beautiful facility, and I'm just so honored to be on here with you and Jim, and so
thank you.
Looking forward to the conversation.
I know you were the youngest of 11 children, and that you grew up in poverty. Is that why? Is that one of the reasons why it means so much to you to do all that you're doing for young people?
Well, you know, let me just say that we grew up poor, but we didn't know we was poor. And I think that's the beauty when I look back at my childhood, because I grew up on a farm. And, you know, we got up early in the morning, we went to the fields, we picked cotton, we picked tobacco, we grew vegetables, we did everything that a family does on a farm to make money and to survive. We grew most of our food. And so what I tried to do when I was coming out of the pros and I knew I was coming to an end in my career, I wanted to build something that would kind of give the kids the same kind of experience I had growing up on a farm and what it teaches you: discipline, hard work, sacrifice, all the things that it takes to be successful, whether you're in sports or business or whatever. You know, these are things that any profession will demand of you: to be committed, to make the sacrifice, to put in the time, the hard work. And so these are things that is kind of fundamental in life. And so I wanted to build that boys' home, and I wanted to put it on a farm because, you know, when you look at what's happening in our society, especially with young people, they don't have a whole lot of respect for life. But when you grow up on a farm, you learn to respect life. It could be in the form of a plant or the crops you're growing. It could be in the form of the livestock that you're dependent on to help you survive out there on the farm. And people, you know, just the human decency of mankind. So these are the kind of the fundamental blocks that we've set up for this home to teach kids, and of course their faith in Christ and education and all these things that is going to help propel them to go to where they want to go. And I think more than anything, guys, it's just giving kids hope, letting them know that don't care what your circumstances are, that if you're willing to work and make the commitment and all the things that we've talked about, that there's an opportunity for you to succeed. And I think that's what our young people need today. They need hope. They need to know that, yeah, I might be, you know, living in the inner city. My parents might be on drugs, might be raised by my grandmother, but there's still hope if you're willing to work and do all the things it takes to be successful.
You said that you didn't know you were poor. Did you know at some point in your life the lessons that you were learning by being raised on this farm in Georgia?
Yeah, well, you know, my sister, like I said, I'm the youngest of 11 kids. And my sister had a boyfriend. She was dating this guy. And I remember being a little kid out there in the yard. I mean, we didn't have grass. We had, I'm talking about a dirt yard. And so we're out there playing it. And I told them, I said, one day you all going to see me on television playing football. Now, this was the vision I had as a kid. And the reason I had that vision, because we didn't have a television growing up, but my neighbor, which was about a half a mile away, we lived in the country, dirt roads. My dad would let us go over there and watch football. And back then, Lanny Moore, Johnny Unitas, Raymond Berry, all those guys were stars. So I got to see at least 2 or 3 games in my childhood. And that's why I told this guy, I said, one day you all going to see me on television.
How old were you when you said that?
When I told H.W. Miller was the guy's name. When I told him that, I was like 10 years old. And this was like in 1959, 60. I'm talking about this was, I was a young kid. And so they looked at me and said, oh, yeah, sure. You know, you're going to be on TV. We don't even have a TV. But that was the vision I had as a child. And now, I had no idea that I would go on to help win 4 Super Bowls and be in the Hall of Fame. That wasn't, my vision was that I was going to play football and they was going to see me on television.
Did your family support you going to football practice rather than working on the farm?
That's a great question. I was just telling someone the other day that my father, you know, he thought football was just, you know, you just out there playing and just kids after school playing. And a lot of times I would have to miss practice to, you know, because I had work to do. I had to get on the bus and come home. And the times that they would let me stay after practice, I had no idea how I would get home. And a lot of times the coach would bring me home, very seldom, because my parents, you know, we didn't have a vehicle, so somebody was going to have to take me home, whether it was one of the coach, the head coach, assistant coach, or somebody working with the team. And it's really interesting when I look back at my own career. Now, every player you talk to has a story to tell. But I think my story is interesting because, number one, I grew up doing segregation. You know, we couldn't play, the schools were segregated. So there was a black high school and a white high school. And in 1966, when I graduated, and the way I got to Southern University was we played a school in Meta, Georgia, and I scored 5 touchdowns. I was a wide receiver. I ran kickoffs back, and I played defensive back. And that night, I scored 5 touchdowns. And I didn't think anything about it. I'm on to basketball because that was the last game of the season. But one of the officials at that game, he was officiating the game. He knew somebody at Southern University. I had never heard of Southern University, didn't know where it was located. So they called out there and told the head coach, say, you all need to come look at this kid. And they told him about me. And so the head coach from Southern University showed up unannounced at my father's house. He never saw me because I was out playing basketball. The high school team was out of town. I was on that team playing basketball. But he talked to my father and he said, I want your son to come to Southern. He said, we'll give him a scholarship. We'll even give him a job for the summer if we come when he graduates from high school. And so he and my father talked, and my father made an executive decision. He said he's coming. I'll send him out there. So when I come home, my father said, son, there was some coach here from some school out there in Louisiana, and they offered you a scholarship. And I told him, he would go, and I said, yes, sir, I'll be, you know, look, back then, you know, I couldn't have gone to University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, or Florida State, or any of those schools. And that, you know, when he told me that some school in Louisiana and Southern University, I'm like, man, that's great news, because I could have went to Savannah State or Albany State, some of those historical black colleges, but I got a chance to go out to Louisiana. And for me, that was like a vacation, because I don't even think I had been out the state of Georgia, okay? So, and what happened was I graduated one day, got on the bus, went to Louisiana, the longest bus ride of my life. I thought I'd never get there. But when I got there, the captain of the security department at Southern University, he was the captain of the little police force, gave me a job standing in the middle of the street directing traffic. I had on an orange vest, you know, but
this was before the cowboy hat too, right?
Well, I wasn't wearing the cowboy hat yet. The cowboy hat's a different story, but I'll tell you about that. But what happened, he put me in the middle of the street, taught me how to direct traffic. And one of the greatest compliments that ever been paid to me, especially as a young man, he said, "You're one of the best employees I've ever had." And that work ethic was developed out there on that farm. You know, I'm talking about, I'm standing in 100-degree weather in the middle of the streets directing traffic. Heat didn't bother me because I grew up in the fields. And so, but the cowboy hat is it's an interesting story, but I was, you know, growing up on a farm, we didn't have tractors now. We had mules and horses and sleds and wagons. That's how we got around on that farm and gathered crops and all that stuff. But there was a guy, he was walking around on campus every day with a cowboy hat, starched jeans, and I said, man, I got to meet that guy there. His name was Matt Matthews, and to this day, Matt and I talk, and we you know, text each other and stuff. But Matt Matthews took me to a ranch outside of the campus in Baton Rouge there. And this guy, his name was Lester Blumenstiel. He was a horse trader. Now, my background was plowing horses and driving wagons and sled. And that's when I got introduced to the Western horsemanship. And what happened was, I always loved animals because that was, you know, I grew up with these horses and mules and stuff. But man, when I got introduced to the Western riding and the Western, you know, horses, I'm talking about good animals that could work cattle and, you know, you can do all kind of sporting events with, that's when I was hooked. And when I got drafted by the Steelers in 1970, one of the first things I did was I bought 3 horses. I didn't have enough sense to just buy one. I bought 3, and ever since then I've been breeding them. You know, it's been my life, and so that's kind of how the whole, you know, this Western, you know, the cowboy hat, the jeans, the boots, that's kind of how it all got started. And that was back in 1970.
Where did you live in 1970 with the horses? Where? Around Pittsburgh?
Well, when I first came to Pittsburgh, I lived out in Squirrel Hill. But, you know, like most athletes, I wasn't staying up here during the off season. I've lived all over Pittsburgh, from Squirrel Hill to North Hill to Green Tree. And my last resident in Pittsburgh was in Wexford before I moved to Washington County.
So you had the horses with you at that time?
No, I didn't have the horses, but I would come up here and I would play. And as soon as the season was over with, I would go back down south. I lived in Louisiana for about 10 years to 1980. Then we built a home in Georgia, which we still have that place, and that's kind of where, between Washington County and Georgia, is where the horses and I are doing most of the year.
Did Bill Nunn have any impact on your draft?
Oh, my goodness. Bill Nunn had a tremendous impact on me, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and everything that happened with the Steelers since he was hired by Dan Rooney. And, you know, we just celebrated him going into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And really, Bill Nunn, it's hard to write this history of the Pittsburgh Steelers without Bill Nunn. Bill Nunn found guys like Donnie Shell, L.C. Greenwood, Glenn Edwards, Ernie Holmes, Mel Blount, John Stallworth, and out of those guys that I just named, 3 of us are in the Hall of Fame. And so he had a tremendous impact. And one of the things that happened, Bill Nunn worked for the Pittsburgh Courier, and he was writing about the Steelers, not really taking advantage of drafting players out of the historical black colleges. And so Dan Rooney met with Bill Nunn, which was smart, and he hired him. And when he hired him, then Bill started going into the historical black colleges, and they start drafting players. And when you look at the makeup of that team in the 70s, most of those guys were from small schools. A lot of them was from historical black schools, but they had a theory and a philosophy that they went by. And, you know, I think like Joe Green, who went to North Texas State, it's a small school, but they were looking for athletes, but they were looking for certain kind of athletes. And I think when I look back at that team, not only do I think and see the greatness in the players, but I also see the greatness in the people, whether it was a Bill Nunn or the Rooneys or, you know, guys who really was helping Chuck Noll, was helping put that team together. And the thing about what Chuck brought a different culture, because the Steelers were, you know, what, 1-13 when Chuck his first season, and before that they were the laughing stock of the NFL. But all that changed when Dan Rooney hired Chuck and hired Bill Nunn. And Dan Rooney deserves a lot of credit because he took over from his father, and he ran that team like a business. And you know, they knew what they wanted, and they know where they was trying to go, and that was important.
Did you have a good relationship with Chuck?
I had a good relationship with Chuck. I had a good relationship with the Rooneys. Now, relationships is one thing and business is another. And I learned that from them. Dan Rooney was a tough negotiator, you know, hard-nosed. I had disagreements with him, and I think that's true whether you are in a family or in an organization. But I can honestly say that I think if you talk to any player, they'll tell you that very few words were exchanged between Chuck and the players, you know, and we all knew that. We knew what kind of guy he was. Chuck was a good man, but Chuck came out of that Paul Brown school of coaching, and, you know, where you're the players, I'm the coach, and,
yep.
You know, so I'm not sure he could coach in this day and time with the kind of players and the way the game has changed, but he came along at the right time, and he was the right man for the job for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
I think you're absolutely right. Chuck used to live right over here.
I know. I know he's an Upper St. Clair guy, yeah.
Well, then you guys used to stay at the hotel?
Right out here.
Yeah,
right.
that was right down the street from his house.
Mel, I've been to enough charity events to know that those of you that were part of those great Super Bowl teams, you're a band of brothers. Do you think it's typical of NFL former players to have the kind of bond among players that the Steelers do, or is this a rather unique situation?
Well, I don't know, but I do know this, that any time that you're part of a successful organization, it breeds unity. And I think that the reason you see the kind of camaraderie and respect and love for one another among the Steeler players is because we've had success together. And that's important. Now, I don't think it would be like that if we were a losing organization. And, I think the other thing is that during the time when I played, guys didn't move around. I played 14 years for the Steelers. When you look at guys like Joe Green and LC and Dwight and Andy Russell, Jack Ham, Lambert, all these guys played their whole career in Pittsburgh. So there's a history as far as relationships are concerned with players. It wasn't like I played 1 year with Jack Ham and then moved on. So there's a long history of relationships and friendship and bonding, and so I think that's one of the things that you see with the Steelers, especially in the 70s. And I think that continued until, I'd say, in the late 80s, early 90s, when guys started moving around a lot. And now, you can you could play for the Steelers this year. Next year, you could be in Cincinnati or Cleveland, and that was unheard of when I played.
The old days are still pretty good to me, I think. But what do you think of these young defensive backs? Do you watch the Steelers?
I do. I watch. I love football. I watch the game. People say, "Well, what do you think about the game?" It's not the same. Well, football, it wasn't the same when I came along.
Right.
It wasn't the same game that they played in the 60s that we played in the 70s. So the game is always evolving, and it will continue to evolve because the players are different. Players are bigger now, stronger, faster. We never had a 300-pound player on our team. He couldn't have played. Chuck, Ernie Holmes would get up to 275, and Chuck would tell him, you got to lose weight, But now you get a guy 275, he couldn't play in the line today because he's too small. But so I think rule changes, all that is a part of making the game better, making it safer, and I think as a fan, you have to stay up with the game because it's going to continue to change.
Speaking, you said rule changes. I'm not sure how our audience knows about this, but tell us about the Mel Blount unwritten rule change.
Well, it's not unwritten. It's a rule.
Yeah,
it's a rule that basically, when I played, I was different because I had speed, I had size, and I had strength, and I had reach. My wingspan, and so the bump and run. That's what I came out of college playing, the bump and run. And so when I got to the pros, you could jam a guy all the way downfield as long as the ball hadn't been released, hadn't been thrown. I mean, he could be running his route, and you could jam him and run with him. And so we were playing Cincinnati. Paul Brown started that team over there in Cincinnati, and Paul Brown was the coach. And also Paul Brown was on the competition committee. And so, Isaac Curtis, all these guys, I was jamming them at the line of scrimmage and, wasn't letting them get off the line. So I'll never forget, there was a Monday night game, and I reacted to a play that broke Trump, what's his name, the tight end, Trumpy, broke his jaw, and it was a clean hit. That kind of kicked off everything that, because Paul Brown, Chuck Noll, Chuck Noll was one of Paul Brown's players and understudies, and so they going at each other. And it's competition, it's being competitive. And so what happened was Pete Rozelle, they flew me up from Pittsburgh to New York. And we sitting in this film room. And they running back then it was projectors, they running the projector, running this play, run it back, and they showed the play when I hit Trumpy, and they was saying it was an illegal hit. I said, what happened? I reacted to the ball, and my shoulder pads kind of caught him under the jaw. And so they looked at that play. Then they looked at a play where I was jamming Isaac Curtis, and they were saying, well, you can't do that. And I said, until you all change the rule, I'm going to continue to play that way. And I didn't think anything about it. And so the next year, they changed the rule, and they call it the Mel Blount rule.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the history of that. But it all started with Cincinnati and with Paul Brown being on the competition committee and really looking at how they could find some kind of competitive edge, what I call it. And Chuck used to say they want to legislate the game to slow us down. But, we just had great players. I mean, we were great up front. We were great at the linebacker position. And we was great in our secondary. Because we had J.T. Thomas was the #1 pick. We had Mike Wagner, Glenn Edwards, and then Donnie Shell. So we had the horses to play the game. And when you're winning, everybody look at you because they want to see what you're doing. And I think what it all comes down to, you got to have great players. And you got to have coaches who know how to put those players in position to win.
You look like you could still play. Every time
I appreciate the compliment, but I don't know of too many 73-year-olds out there trying to play.
Every time I've seen you at a banquet or on television, I thought, God, he looks like he can still play.
Well, I appreciate that. I try to take care of myself. I still work out. I ride horses every day, which people don't realize it's a lot of exercise. And I think the thing, though, what I have learned is it's good to stay busy, but it's also important what you eat. What you put into your body has a lot to do with your longevity.
What don't you eat?
Well, I try not to eat a lot of junk food. I eat a lot of salads, and I try to stay away from red meat. I like to eat chicken and fish, and really, the older I get, the less I eat. But when I do eat something, I try to make sure it's something that's going to help preserve me.
Mel, we only have a couple of minutes left. I went back yesterday and watched your Hall of Fame speech. What was it like to stand? What were you thinking as you were standing there about to give that speech, realizing that you were now being included among one of the greats in the history of the National Football League?
Well, there were a lot of things. I was really somewhat distracted, and I say that because I was in a real struggle, a real battle, building that boys' home out there in Washington County, and there were so many things that was going on. And I don't know if you know the history of what we had to deal with out there, but all of that was going on, and it was happening the week leading up to the Hall of Fame. So I often look back at that Hall of Fame speech, and I did talk about what I was dealing with out there, and that we would succeed and put that boys' home in. But beside that, the journey from the story that I told you about, the vision of a young kid saying one day that I would be on television playing ball. I never thought that I would be a guy who would be a part of 4 Super Bowls or would be considered for the Hall of Fame. And it's one of those moments in time and moments in your life that you look back at it, and the more you think about it, the more awesome it really seems. And then you realize too how blessed you've been to have something like that happen to you. I mean, there's so many guys that have played this game, and to be one of those guys that's chosen to be in the Hall of Fame. There was a stat when they were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the pro football. There was 25,600 some men who have played at that time in the National Football League. And to think about, there's only 300 some players in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And what made it so awesome is they did out of that history, they picked 100 players as the 100 greatest players. And to be a part of that group, and you look back at it and you say, you know, only God could make that happen. And you just know that God bless you, and he had his hands on you to be a part of all that. And so that's how I look at it. And I think if everyone would stand up and tell the truth about their Hall of Fame speech, they would say, man, I wish I would have said this. I wish I'd have, because it keeps coming at you from the experience, the journey. You think about the guys you played with. You think about guys who you knew probably was better than you, but they didn't make it. They got hurt or something happened. And so it's a special moment, it's a special memory, and it's something that I'll always cherish.
Mel, may God continue to bless you and the great work that you do. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Mel.
Hey, thanks, guys. It's been a real honor. Been a pleasure.
Mel Blount joining us on 15241 Today Talk. Remember, folks, that we're blessed here in Western Pennsylvania because so many of our successful pro athletes care enough not only to be champions in Pittsburgh, but continue to live in the area as Mel Blount has done and made a commitment to young people in Western Pennsylvania. Thanks for joining us.